Forward to today. Don and I started the Tennessee Baptist Convention about the same time, and he became your pastor, and shortly thereafter I went on to do some other things as well. Now, I grew up in church. My dad was a minister of music, so we were always in church, whether it snowed or sleeted, hailed, or whatever, we were there. So I never had the luxury of just missing church. I'll tell you more about that here in just a minute. I was a youth minister for 13 years before I went into counseling, which is what I do as a profession. And in fact, I was in a church the other night, and the pastor introduced me as Tony Rankin and said he was a youth minister for 13 years, and he's been in counseling ever since. And for those who've ever worked with teenagers or had a teenager, you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it will drive you a little bonkers. It's important for you to know that I have 3 kids. I have a 33-year-old son who's married, and he has 2 kids, my grandkids. Preston is 6. Kaylee is almost 2. And every Saturday night, they spend the night with us because we want to make sure they get in church. We can't always guarantee that Drew and Nikki will get to church, but we can always make sure that Kaylee and Preston get to church. So because of the schedule for this weekend, I got to miss, and I didn't want to, but I got to miss my grandkids last night. I'll see them probably next Saturday, I guess. I have a 29-year-old son who's dating a young lady, and then I have a 27-year-old daughter who's getting married in 2 months. And so I'm preparing for that because I'm doing her ceremony. And I don't know if you've ever been to a wedding where the father or the bride did the ceremony. It generally doesn't go very well. And so I'm trying to prepare myself to be emotionally stable and be prepared for a big day in our lives. All that to say is I have kids, I have grandkids, I've worked in the church, I'm a therapist, I enjoy being with people, and so everything that I say and do today will kind of come from that bent. So I want you to be thinking for a minute, because Don asked me to be here, but I don't want to come in just with a piece of paper and some notes and tell you here's what you need to hear. I want you to be thinking for a minute of what you hope I can cover this morning during worship and tonight, because I want to make sure we answer as many questions as you have. So be thinking. I'm going to ask you here in just a few minutes. But Don, when I walked in this morning, as soon as I walked in, this building reminds me of where I went to worship in middle school. And this the whole setup, and it reminded me of a story. In fact, it happened back there on the next to back row, because that's where all the teenagers sat. In fact, I think that's where they sit here. Okay, so I'm watching you guys during church today. Well, our pastor, kind of like Pastor Don, if he called on you to pray, you did what? You prayed. Your name didn't have to be in the bulletin. You weren't told you only have 37 seconds to pray because we got to get out in time. He just said, if you're called on to pray, you pray. So that's the way I grew up too, Don. One day during the sermon, my buddy fell asleep. I'm in 7th grade, so you're brilliant in 7th grade, right? So what? Brother Roger wants you to pray. so he got up from the back row, walked all the way down here, got up here next to Brother Roger. And Brother Roger went, "Phil, can I help you?" He said, "Yeah, I just want to pray." He said, "So pray." And Philip prayed that little 7th grade prayer, forgive us when we let you down in sin, and protect all the missionaries and give us a safe ride home. But I'm telling you, it wasn't that funny. It was hilarious to me. But my dad was the minister of music, and he was on the platform. And my mother sang alto in the choir, and she was on the platform, and they both saw what happened. And so when I got home, I learned what it means when your parents say, "I have a bone to pick with you." I never knew what that meant until they picked my bone. It was a long afternoon. So, teenagers, if you're back here today, I'm watching you. And don't fall asleep. It also, I was reminded of a story. Actually, I was reminded of this weekend in Gatlinburg, and I'm going to tell it to you guys. I graduated from Antioch High School in Antioch, Tennessee. Good. What year? okay. I don't really know what to say about that other than... Actually, I just finished my second year of kindergarten. And that says a lot about me, too. If you know, many people have been to 2 years of kindergarten, and if you have been, hey, we're in the same club here. I don't think I could get my cutting right or my letters right or my color, whatever it was. But we've had several high school reunions since then, haven't we? And on one particular high school reunion, there were 3 people I did not want to see. Nothing immoral, nothing illegal. I just didn't want to see them. You know people like that? You have people like that in your family or your life? But the day of the reunion, I bumped into one of them at Kroger's. And there in the bread aisle, I realized I don't want to see her. So I did what most of you would have done. I went to the Jell-O aisle, which is aisle 2. And as you know how Kroger's goes, you just keep bumping into the same people. So finally on aisle 7, in front of the frozen pizzas, I said, Tony, you are a therapist. Deal with this. So I looked at her and said, hey, Kathy. And she went, I said, Kathy, I hear you've been sick. See, I'd heard she'd had cancer. And she kind of went, well, how did you know? I said, well, I heard it from one of our friends, and it was clear to me she did not know who I was. So I said, Kathy, Tony from high school. And she went, I said, Tony Rankin from high school. Kathy, we were in the band together. I played tuba and you were at the color guard. For those, how many of you have been in the band before? It is not a good thing when you put somebody who plays tuba and somebody in the color guard in the back of the band bus. There's nothing good that comes out of that. You what? You play tuba too? We have some stories to talk about, don't we? She got, oh, I remember you being much taller. Now, what you've got to know that when I graduated in high school, I weighed 113 pounds. Just imagine this. Half. That really made me mad. So I went home and I opened up my yearbook and I read the note she wrote me. It was on the front page of the yearbook, which is a pretty significant place to sign. Here's what it said. Dear Tony, you were a great student council president. Our school did things this year that we would not have done if you hadn't been in charge. You are a great band captain. We had so much fun on all of our band trips. And you did a great job with this yearbook as the editor. And then she went on to say some things that I'm not going to get into with you because it's none of your business. And then she signed her letter and said this, I will never forget you. Hang on to that thought for this morning and for tonight, because I think sometimes we think we do and say things that people will remember. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So here's what I want to do. What are some things you hope we can cover this morning during worship and even tonight that would help you understand how to do family or how to live in this ungodly world that we seem to live in? What's a question that you have or something you hope we cover? When is it okay to kick them out? Is that your son right there? Are you at 14, 15? It's a little bit early, but we'll see if we can come up with something like that. I mean, have you ever gotten to the point where you got to think through, is it time for them to leave? Yeah. My daughter, who's 27, she's really not a problem, but she said to me a while back, I think I need to get my own apartment. And I'm thinking, I can't wait to hear this answer, because she already has 2 bedrooms. She already has 2 full baths that she's inherited from her brothers who don't live at the house anymore. She has an entrance that she comes and goes to. She has free groceries. She has free electricity. And she wants to go get her apartment for privacy. It was almost the time to kick her out when she said that. So maybe we'll look at, when is it time to move your kids on? Somebody else, what's the question you have? And it may be from a teenager who has a question about how parents are too. Might have something? Don, this is going to be a really short day. Anybody? Yes, right here. Okay? Let me repeat the questions. The questions are this: how do we deal with the fact that someday when we have kids, we will have to make decisions about schooling? I know that's a big issue. It's a big issue everywhere. And let me say this before I go into the other big issues. My wife's a public school teacher, but I've had kids in public school. I've had kids in Christian school. I've had kids in Church of Christ school. I've had kids in parochial school. I've had kids homeschooled. So I don't have a preconceived notion of the only way that you get this done. It has a lot to do with the needs of your kid. It also has to do with the neighborhood. And I don't mean the neighborhood, but the kind of the region in where you might be living. If you live here, your options are probably fewer than if you lived in Nashville. So you have to think through, what are my options? So it is important that we as parents think through the importance of education. Not only the importance of education, but what's the environment going to be where they're educated. I don't mind telling you that when my 29-year-old son Caleb was in a Catholic school, they were really strict, because they feel like the sanctity of life, or the importance of life, is utmost. And if you did certain things with your body, you got kicked out. If you did certain things with to your body, you got kicked out. If you said certain things about other people, you got kicked out. I mean, there were people who were dismissed from that school because they made fun of somebody's weight or skin color. So you have to make sure that the needs that you have fit the way the school is. Okay? Now, one of the issues that's been brought up here is, the reason we consider that is, do I want my kid going to school with somebody who has two moms or two dads, or whose dad wears a skirt? So I think those are the three things you mentioned, correct? And we have to consider that. I will caution you that though you may feel like none of that happens in your town here, it does. In fact, you may think, well, we're safe because we don't live in Nashville or Brentwood or Franklin. That doesn't keep you from having to deal with any of these issues, because it's everywhere you go. You also have to know that just because you send your child to a Christian school does not mean that some of that's not there. Everybody doesn't choose a Christian school because it's a Christian school. Sometimes they choose it. Why? Do what? They've been in trouble somewhere. They think, and not only do they think the Christian school can fix their kids, they expect them to, because for $6,000 to $12,000 a year, you better fix my kid. What's another reason that you have to be careful with even the Christian school choice? You have a lot of parents there who aren't Christian. So just because your kid goes to a Christian school does not mean that everything you get from that experience is what you're paying for. Now, since we're kind of mentioning the negatives of everything, we'll mention the negatives of homeschooling too. If you homeschool, you are the teacher, principal, guidance counselor, cheerleading sponsor, bus driver, cafeteria worker. What else are you if you homeschool? Janitor. Sorry, I forgot that one. The guidance counselor, the principal, everything but the Prince of Peace. Okay? So you got to be careful. Educating our children is a pretty big deal. And I'm looking at a room now with 2 or 3 dozen teenagers and adolescents and minors who need to be educated properly. And I don't know about you, but if you go out to places like fast food restaurants, the gas station, and you see the people who are disappointing us and not being able to give change back or don't know how to respond to people, we become doubly interested and concerned with our school systems, don't we? Went to Burger King the other day, ordered a number one. Normally it's $7.49. I gave the guy 20, and he gave me $23.21 back. I'm thinking, I know I didn't have a $30 bill in my wallet. I tried to help him. And nobody was home. So I knew if I took the money, he would be short and get in trouble, lose his job. I thought if I could go inside and climb around the counter, I could probably help him count it out, but that's not sensible. So I ended up I just gave it all back to him. I don't know, he probably put it in his pocket. But it's a reminder how important our education system is. Because if we don't get that fixed, where are we going to be 30 years from now as a country? Okay? So it's important, and we're going to deal some throughout the day with how do we make choices. And what do we do when our kids are in environments, or we as adults are in environments when there are people who are in same-sex relationships? What do we do when it's our next-door neighbors? What do we do when it's the person who is helping us at the grocery store? Or what do we do when we find that it's our doctor or doctors? Are there things you hope we can address? Maybe I'll ask it this way. Teenagers, what is something you wish your parents would do differently? I hear crickets. Tell you what. Let me ask parents, what are some things you wish your teenagers would do differently? Shut up and listen, okay? Hey, what do you mean by that? Okay. Okay, so the comment is pretty loaded. One is how to help our teenagers realize that when they're alone, they're not alone. When they're lonely, they're not alone. There's always God to turn to. Sometimes we as parents can't give the best response because we're not the friend, we're the parent figure. So sometimes our words aren't heard. We are going to talk a lot about that during the day. It's also important for you as parents and grandparents to realize that you are not to be the best friend. And sometimes it's hard to discipline, hard to give guidance. Someone else.
What do you do when you have a blended family?
Okay, so the question, the comment is, what do you do when there's a blended family? And now we're kind of we're family now. We're starting to learn each other. How many of you are in a blended family situation? Okay. Sometimes in blended families, there's one family that has a certain set of standards of how to discipline, and another set of how to be a friend when they ought to be the disciplinarian. And it's one thing it's hard to deal with is the fact you can only be responsible for you. If you could mandate the other person's behavior, you probably would still be married. Generally, the reason that people get divorced is because they don't get along. I know very few people who got divorced because they were such good friends and such good companions. So there's probably some kind of difference in parenting. So you have to remember, you have to be responsible for yourself. Hopefully, in turn, the other parent or other parents will see things differently. But then you have to, and it may not happen in your situation, but you have to let your kids know too, here's the deal. I'm working at being the best dad I can be and knowing the best way to parent you. And I realize sometimes I get frustrated with your mom and the persons that she lives with. But I'm telling you, here's why I do what I do. And there has to be some explanation besides because I said so. Now, I'm not seeing any young children here, but when a kid hits 7 years of age, they know better. In other words, they know that when you say, because I said so, that's junk. They know it's a cop-out. So you've got to know as a parent or grandparent who's raising a kid, when you go to tell them something, you need to have an explanation. And it needs to make sense. It needs to be because, not because I'm the parent or because, I'm 3 times your age. It needs to be, here's the explanation. The reason I want you to drive the speed limit is, or what scares me when you date that guy I don't want you to date, here's what I'm afraid of. Not so that you can boss her or him, but so you can at least tell them what your explanation is. So if they do make that poor choice, you don't have to go to them and say, see, I told you so. They've already heard it. And then in time, they will think the next time Dad speaks up, maybe I should listen. I do know in blended families, and we're going to talk about that particularly tonight at 5 o'clock, because that's one of the things I had a feeling was probably an issue here in the church. We're going to talk some about what do we do with when there are 2 sets of parents, 2 households. How old are your kids? 14 and 19. How long have you been divorced? Your wife's kids, okay? And how long have she been divorced from the kid's dad? 6 years. So then those kids were 13 and 8, right? So here's what happens, and I'll say this and I'll move on to something else. Kids who go back and forth between houses are much like buying goldfish at the pet store. I mean, when you go to a pet store and you've bought fish before, what do? Just hand you the fish in your hands? They put it in the bag. And what do they tell you to do with the bag? Put it in the water and let it what? Float and acclimate. They don't just tell you to dump the fish straight into the water. They tell you let that bag float around for a little bit. So if you've got kids in a divorce situation, every time they come to your house, you've got to let them reacclimate. And every time they go from your house to their house, they've got to reacclimate. So if they walk in the front door and you expect them immediately to jump on your set of rules, you've got to remember where they just came from. And when you do that, you're like dumping a fish into an aquarium, and what happens to that fish? It goes into shock. So, well, Tony, that's just not right. Because my kids ought to know, they've been in this situation for 6 years, they ought to know, well, it's just tough. Kind of like going on vacation. Don't you hate to come back from vacation? It takes a while to kind of settle back in. And so the same was true when kids are in a divorce situation. Other issues you hope we can address now or then? Yeah, teen suicide. And what was the last part? Let's do this, because this is the crux of why Don had me come in. Our kids and we as parents and grandparents live in a pretty ungodly society. And it's not a matter of saying, you better act right when you come back from your mama's house, daddy's house, or whatever, or you need to make sure you don't kill yourself because you're never lonely, you've always got somebody to talk to. It's not that easy. It's pretty complicated. In fact, what I've done, I jotted down a few things that our society is going through. That's not, we think it's just a non-issue, but it has something attached to it. For instance, these are no in particular order, but the first one I wrote down is sexual abuse. Here's what you have to know. Sexual abuse has been happening for hundreds of years, but it's more prevalent now than ever. You know that 1 out of every 3 females and 1 out of every 5 males is sexually abused before they finish high school. 1 out of 3 females and 1 out of 5 guys. So here's the deal. If I took the 70 people are in this room right now. Let's make it 90. Let's make easy math. If 90 people, I can guarantee you that between 25 and 35 of you guys have been sexually abused. But it's not just a matter of saying, well, then get them some help, Tony. Give them a therapist number. It's more than that, because there are a couple of issues attached to that. One is protection. At some point in their life, they felt unprotected. Doesn't mean that the parent didn't do their job. It just means they were caught in a predicament that offered them no protection. The other issue is secrecy. If 25 or 35 of you have been sexually abused in your life and you've never told anybody, you've done that because you want it to stay a secret. Well, I can't tell people at my church. I'll be embarrassed. I can't tell people at my church because they'll think, that I wanted it. So then the secret becomes a bigger deal because we sit on it for decades. That's an issue in our society. And I'll tell you, the reason that we have to look at the unmet needs with every one of these issues is because sometimes the result is teenage suicide. They just, because they haven't felt protected or they can't deal with a secret, sometimes they escape by killing themselves. Not just about sexual abuse, but many other things too. That goes for adults as well. I'm not just talking about teenagers here. I'm looking at adults, and I can tell in some of your eyes that you know what I'm talking about. Second thing, these phones is an issue. I don't have to come back next week, Don. You don't have to like me. They don't have to like me. But I'm telling you, these phones are an issue. On average, the American teenager and adult alike spends 3 hours a day on their phone. Not making phone calls, but on social media looking up information. That's double what it was 10 years ago. And when did cell phones come out? Remember? Okay, so you had one in 93. That was one of the early ones. Yeah, in a bag. And if you had one for your car, it looked like a brick. So in the last 10 years, we have doubled our time spent on our phones. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem is we spend time on our phone and we're avoiding relationships. Go to a restaurant and watch what families are doing while they're waiting on their food, or even while they're eating, doing this. And it's because they're bored and they're avoiding relationships. Do you agree with that? Do you do anything, and you don't have to tell me now, but you need to think about it today. Do you do anything in your families to limit that or change that? And though it's difficult to say to an adult child, you need to put down your phone because you're not paying for it anymore or shouldn't be paying for it anymore, right? It's hard to sometimes say we need to turn off our phones while we eat, or while we're sitting and talking, or while we're about to open up Christmas presents. The biggest problem, in my opinion, two problems. One is the avoidance of relationships, but it's also the amount of energy and time we spend on social media that is almost completely a waste of time. I'm coming back to that here in a minute, and I'll probably come back to it all day long. Yes, right here. So his daughter, they probably know who she is, will not answer a phone call, but will text. Okay, aren't teenagers just rude? But let's talk about adults for a minute. The other night, my wife and I were talking about something. We need to know something that Caitlin needs to do for our wedding. So we need to ask Caitlin about the invitations. And so my wife said, okay. Next thing I do, I look over there and she's, what are you doing? Well, I'm texting Caitlin. I said, she's downstairs. Now, I'm not being a part of this. That's how we've gotten, though, right? Or maybe my favorite is, I can even read the text to you right now. coming to Old Charlie's last Friday night to eat with my daughter and my wife. Hey, we're at the table, third table from the right when you come in the front door. Really? Like I can't find you? I know what you look like. I've been married to you for 35 years, dated you for 2 before that, but we've gotten where we needlessly spend time on our phones. And it's laziness. Some of you think it's cute. It's a avoidance of relationships. Let me throw out another one. And this is about all of us in this room. We know today that half of all marriages end in divorce. I'm not going to dog that. I've got 2 sisters who are divorced. I've learned a lot of lessons about my own marriage and my own family through dealing with them and their divorces. I'm not going to dog that issue, but I want us to look at this thing a little bit deeper. We know that 75% of all people who divorce will remarry. There's not a problem with that, except it has issues. Because what happens is, if 1 out of 2 persons get divorced, that means that 50% of all kids are being raised by 2 biological parents in 2 different houses, but they're being raised by a biological parent and somebody else they live with. What's the issue attached with that? The divorce rate of those who've been divorced once is higher. In fact, it doubles. When someone marries a second time, the likelihood goes from 50% to about 75%. That's not everybody. Some people in here are successfully married a second time. Don't hear me belittling that. But hear me just say there's some issues we just have to stare at. Doesn't mean we're bad people. It just means we have to stare at the fact that kids are dealing now with a commitment issue. So if you are a divorced person, you just need to make sure you have a conversation with your kids about commitment. Talk about your divorce. Talk about what happened. Talk about what you want for them. Because commitment is one of the unmet needs that children have in divorce. Also, there's uncertainty. How many of you have lived through your parents' divorce? Okay. Remember having those days when you just wondered what's up and what's next? Am I going to come home and Dad's going to be here or Mom's not going to be here? The uncertainty sometimes is the issue for the child, and you have to know that children have this huge security need in their family. So if something has caused insecurity, you just need to address the fact, how can we give them reassurance? So there's uncertainty, there's security, and there's commitment issues. Look at another one. I'm just going to hit and miss some different things I think are important for your church. 1/3 of all children get their first drink of alcohol before they're 12. But listen to the rest of it. 1/3 of all children, means anybody under 18, get their first drink of alcohol before they're age 12 with their parents' permission. Not shame anybody, not blaming anybody, but parents, we have responsibility to help our children make good choices. I'm not even talking about not drinking alcohol. I'm talking about not letting our children drink, 1, when it's illegal, and 2, when their bodies are still developing. Even the parents who wait till their kids are 15 to encourage them to drink in safety of the home need to know that the body is still developing. The liver, the brain, the hormones, the growth structure. And so if we're permitting, I know I'm not really talking to everybody in the room, but if we permit our kids to drink before they should, if they choose to, we need to be careful with the fault that we carry for hurting their bodies. Now, so no, you're not going to be shamed or blamed here, but why? And I don't think because you answered this question you're guilty, but why would a parent let their kid drink before they're 12? So they won't do it when they're older. Yeah, I remember the day that my dad said, if you want 6 Krispy Kreme donuts, Just go ahead and do it as a teenager because there'll be a day when you can't. Well, yeah, I don't eat 6 Krispy Kreme donuts anymore. That's just the beginning. That's just the appetizer. I was driving back from Gatlinburg yesterday, and I was getting sleepy, and I heard her calling me. You know, Miss Debbie. Yeah. Miss Debbie, the cream-filled raisin. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we try to convince our kids when they're younger, taste this now because you won't do this in the future. And yet we're doing nothing more than helping them start some really bad habits. It's all right to say, parents, grandparents, there's 3 reasons, and whatever your reasons are, but just tell your kids, here's the reason I don't want you to drink. In my house, it was, I don't want you to do something that kills yourself or somebody else. 2, we have a pretty strong lineage of people who drink hard liquor who don't live past 57, who get stuck on it. And thirdly, I don't want you to do something that makes your body addicted to something that won't help you. You may have different reasons. That's just the conversation I've had with all 3 of my kids. Did that keep them from drinking? No. But at least they know if they do or they did or something happens, at least Dad has told them what his stance is. Next thing. Marijuana. I know none of that's grown in this part of the country. I didn't see any of it driving in, Don. Really, I didn't. I did go, are you kidding me? That close to the road? But if you ask 8th graders, have you smoked weed in the last 30 days? 6% of all 8th graders have smoked weed in the last month. Maybe that's no big deal to you. Maybe you think, well, I thought it was going to be higher than 6%. That's a lot of kids who this month smoked marijuana. You ask 12th graders, they would say in the last 30 days, 23%. Now, we don't think 23% is a whole lot, but how many high schools are here in this county? 2. So, how about maybe 600 to 900 kids in high school, right? So that means anywhere from 150 to 300 of those kids who are seniors smoke weed this month. Is that a concern? It is for me. If I'm driving down some of these roads at night after a football game or after school, the need there is escape. It's really not the issue of smoking marijuana. It's the idea that they're looking for some kind of escape. Now be careful, adults, because we have our own ways to escape. There are many adults who smoke marijuana. It's still illegal for us too. But there are other things that we do to find escape. Let's move off marijuana. Something, in my opinion, more dangerous. You can get mad at me if you want to, but I'm going to tell you that I believe that Facebook is going to be the demise of our country in 7 years. You watch it. Mark it down. You can say, well, I heard that at church 7 years ago. I'm worried. I'm worried. Well, why should we be worried? And don't take it personally because I don't know how much you use it, but why should we be worried about Facebook? It's a way that we vent with little evidence or worries about responsibility. The average person spends 35 minutes a day on Facebook. Now that means most of you spend a lot more than the average, because there are people like me who aren't on Facebook. And trust me, I have my own issues. One of them's just not Facebook. But I'm worried because of how much energy is spent politically, spiritually, gossip-wise, rumor-wise, and perpetuating problems that I think is more than just keeping up with the grandkids in Oregon or keeping up with the sports team in the locker room down the street. I'm not going to get into a lot more of that right now, but I will tell you this. I read something the other day where in some parts of the country, the average is closer to 10 hours a day. on Facebook. It's kind of like this. We had a rule growing up is when you go to a restaurant, you can't order Coke or tea or lemonade because it costs $4 a glass. I'm over exaggerating, but it's at least $3. And so we would finish our meal. At the end of the meal, we would have spent $30 on tea. Kind of crazy, isn't it? So when our kids grew up and they came into some money, like got a job, I began to show them it's not wrong to drink a lemonade or a tea or a Coke or whatever. It's just important to find balance. So I said to my kids, and still do it to this day, if I'm going to order a lemonade, I'm also going to drink a water. And I'm going to drink as much water as I do lemonade. In fact, if you eat out with me, you'll notice it's kind of strange, but I always get 2 glasses. And here's what I'd say. If you want to be on Facebook, okay. But let me challenge you to do something with the same amount of time. You want to spend 35 minutes a day on Facebook, spend 35 minutes a day calling people in your church, encouraging them, or talking to your neighbors about this cool worship place here. Just don't be out of whack and out of bounds with your time. I think people look at Facebook. What's the need met there? I'm not dogging the positive implications of Facebook, but I'm going to show you something very interesting. Permit me to find this real quick. Our church is downtown Nashville. We're 199 years old, and we have voted to stay downtown Nashville. We've had the government of Nashville offer us millions, in the 3-digit millions, for our property. But we have decided to stay downtown and let that be our mission field, which is the right move. We're tearing down a building as we speak and fixing to build a brand new 80,000 square feet building that's going to match the facade of downtown Nashville. It's going to have a coffee shop. It's a pretty cool thing. So a month ago we had a service after worship. We wrapped our arms around the building that's fixing to be torn down. Afterwards, we served punch and cupcakes. And I'm going to start with your pastor. I'm going to say, this is the picture that was taken of me that was put on Facebook. What do you notice about that picture? I have a drink in my hand. Now, that may not be a big deal to you, but, that's a poor job of using Facebook for our church. One of the ministers has a drink in his hand. It's really not. It's actually right out of the punch bowl. But what do you think? We just have to be careful with how we use and misuse Facebook. I'm all for the church using it. But what I'm not for, and I think the danger part is when we misuse it. And you know, and I know, most people misuse Facebook. So in social media, whether it's Instagram or Snapchat or Facebook or whatever, we do see our younger population destroying people. A different version of bullying than used to happen on the playground when most of us were growing up. Yeah, Don, when I was at TBC, when Drew got married, this would have been 7 years ago. I got called through the executive director's office. And he said, "What's this picture? Looks like you're in a tux and you're in a wedding, and you have a red Solo cup in your hand." Really? I paid for that wedding. I paid for that reception. I paid for that punch. I paid for the barbecue, the chicken fingers, everything I paid for. I will guarantee you there was no alcohol at that wedding. But somebody took it upon themselves to take a shot at me. I went for 6 months trying to explain myself away. And that's because somebody didn't like something I'd said someplace and wanted to make an issue. So what Trish is right, it's not just teenagers who do that. Adults do that as well. 2 more things I'll deal with, and then we'll wrap this piece of our morning up. Pornography. Studies tell us that in a typical Sunday morning worship service, glad we're inside. On a typical Sunday morning worship service, that anywhere between 60 and 70% of the congregation have looked at pornography during the week. Not trying to shame anybody, just trying to say we've got to be real careful how we spend our time, because pornography has become easy. It used to be we'd ask the question in therapy, how much money a month are you spending on pornography? And that was the issue, the money and the secrecy with somebody's spouse. Now the question is not asked, how much money do you spend on pornography? Guess why? It's free. We have to be careful, because the issue behind pornography is it's an immediate acceptance. Nobody has ever looked at pornography and been rejected. So pornography is a really easy place for people to go to and feel an immediate sense of acceptance. Because in that intimate part of their life, nobody ever gets rejected in pornography. Last thing I'll mention before I make some sense of all of this. If I was to take something as simple as gaming and talk about how much time is spent people playing video games, it would be alarming to you, the statistics. The average age of the person who games is how old? 18? Somebody else? 14. When I can start holding control. Hang on a minute. The average age is 34. That means there are a lot of people my age who are sitting at home for 2, 3, 8, and 10 hours a day getting lost in games. It's not that games are bad, but what's the need getting met there? Or maybe what's the need that's not getting met there? Is it a sense of escape? It's a disconnect again with relationships. It's a sense of boredom. It's a sense of, I need to do something besides deal with my home, deal with my work, deal with my yard, deal with the groceries, whatever it is that you do. And by the way, it's not just men. One of the fastest growing areas in persons playing games are adults, females, over 23 years of age. In my opinion, that's probably one of the most insignificant things that I've mentioned this morning, but it points to the fact of how much we've gotten away from what relationships should be about. It shows us how much, even in our families, our Christian families, whether it be from our cell phones to the games we play, to pornography, to how we talk on Facebook or whatever, how we've gotten away from what God intended us to be. Real quick. I love sports. I love sports. I love to coach. I like to play. I like to watch. When I was coaching for Mount Juliet Christian Academy in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, I took our little white basketball team to Bordeaux. Bordeaux is a pretty rough place in Nashville. and the team we were playing was not a white team. And I'm saying this on purpose. We had a rule in our basketball league that if you're up by 12 points, you can't press. But we were in their gym, and with 12 seconds to go in the game, we had never shot the ball because the other coach pressed us the whole time. The score was 50-0. I lost my cool. I know it's hard for Don to imagine. I lost my cool. I grabbed the referee and said, there's a rule that says you can't press when you're up by 12. So he called a technical on the other coach. And Ernie Cavender made one of 2 free throws. You'd have thought we won the state championship. I know what it's like to lose 50-1. I remember coaching a baseball game where we won 3-2. We beat the number 1 team in the league. I remember saying, man, I'm great. The very next week, I remember losing a game 5-4 because I made a stupid decision coaching third base and got a kid picked off and lost the game. I've won and I've lost. It's the same way with parenting. It's so important for us to stare at the fact it's not really how we win or lose. It's how we handle ourselves in those moments. 1 John 5, 3-5. For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments, and His commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Who is he who overcomes the world but he who believes that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? I just wanted to start off this morning by saying when it comes to raising families, kids and adults in an ungodly world, there are those moments where we think we just are hopeless because we're no good and we lose 50-1. There are those moments where we celebrate because something has gone well. And then there are those moments when we realize, I got needs. And just because I think I know baseball does not mean I won't make mistakes. So this morning as we worship, tonight as we reconvene, I want us to look at some of the questions you've asked. I want this to be a foundation for where we're going because God expects more of us as a Christian community when it comes to doing family. So I hope you'll, as you worship today and listen, you'll let God begin to penetrate your life and change you in a powerful way. Let's pray. Father, we talk about some silly statistics to the world. We talk about some significant unmet needs that we have and why we do what we do. But as we read the Scriptures make it very clear that what's important is how we love other people and how we count on you to be the Lord of our life. Father, thank you for looking at us, whether we've done well, whether we feel shameful, and you look at us and say, I will never forget you. Thank you for loving us through everything that happens. For your name we pray.